Job chapter 23, I'm going to begin in verse 1. It says, Then Job answered and said, Even today is my complaint bitter, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me, and understand what he would say unto me. Down in verse 8, Job continues on, he says, Behold, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. On the left hand where he doth work, but I cannot behold him. He hideth himself on the right hand, that I cannot see him. Let's go ahead and pray. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be able to have your word preached this morning, and Lord, to be able to look into this a portion of Job's life. Lord, a portion of his life where he's suffering great trials, great affliction. And then, Lord, we ask that you bless the preaching of your word. Lord, give us understanding of the message. Father, speak to each and every one of our hearts. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So Job here, he lays out his complaint. He's been arguing with his friends for quite some time now. His friends, Job, he's lost everything, and he's lost even the support of his wife. And his three friends decide to come and try to, I don't know if they want to cheer him up or they're trying to get his heart right with God, because, you know, they have all wisdom and all understanding. They know exactly why all this came upon Job. And they're trying to convince Job that he has some sort of heinous sin in his life. He commits some heinous crime in the sight of God, and God is punishing him. And Job is standing steadfast on his integrity, on his righteousness. And his friends just don't get it, and neither one's budging. He's got 3 against 1, and there's a 4th guy in there who's he's listening to everybody argue with one another, and he's just silent. He gives his spiel afterwards. But Job here in chapter 23, he answers his friend. He says, you know, today my complaint is bitter, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. And then he begins to desire to talk to God face to face. He wants to bring his case to God and really demand to know why. Why is all this happening? Because Job knows it couldn't be because of some heinous sin. Job is he was an upright man. God describes him as being perfect. He's upright. He's just. And Job, he is a sinner, but it's not like he commits heinous crimes. And he wants to bring his cause before God. Verse 3 says, Oh, that I knew where I might find him. He's talking about God. Oh, that I knew where I could find God. And that I might come even to his seat. He wants to go to the very presence of God and lay out his complaints to God himself. He wants to forget his friends. He's tired of arguing with his friends. His friends just aren't getting it. They're thickheads. And they're not even listening to a word that he has to say. But he wants to go to God. He wants to bring forth his complaint to God. And he says that in verse 4, I will order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Pretty much he says, I know what I want to say. I have my side of the debate all worked out. And he says, I know what I want to say. He says, in verse 5, I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. See, right now, his friends are trying to speak on God's behalf, or they think they are. And Job says, you know, I want to know exactly what God has to say himself. I want to know what he has to say himself. I'm tired of listening to you guys because you're not even listening to me. And so he wants to know what God himself would say to his arguments, to his complaints. And he says, and I would understand what he would say unto me. But I can't find him. In verse 7, I kind of skipped verse 7 because I won't touch upon this, but I'll read it. It says, there the righteous might dispute with him, so should I be delivered forever from my judge. There you're talking about the presence of God. We might dispute with him. In other words, why is this going on? What's going on? What have I done to deserve this? Is there sin in my life that needs to be taken care of? But Job says, behold, I go forward, but he's not there. Backwards, but I cannot perceive him. On the left hand, where he doth work, but I cannot behold him. He hideth himself on the right hand, and that I cannot see him. Job says, I have no idea where God's at. I don't know where to find him. He says, I've already looked. I've gone before, I've gone back, I've turned to the left and I've turned to the right hand. no matter where I look in my life, he's not there. I can't find him. Where's he at? And Job's in a very dark time of his life, and his friends are just making it even worse. And Job really wants to know, where is God in all of his troubles? Where is God when he needs him the most? And it's often been said that the teacher is the quietest during the hardest test. So there are times when God seems to be quiet the most, when we so desperately need to hear him the most. Job was experiencing the darkest part of his life. He'd lost all of his kids. He's lost his business, lost his income, lost his transportation, lost his employees, his servants, lost the support of his wife. He's literally lost everything. And he has yet to recoup from it. He's in a very dark time in his life. He had gone, in 1 hour, he had gone from being on top of the world, being crushed beneath it. The weight of sorrow and grief was pressing so hard down upon Job, he didn't know how much more he could take. But yet, even in the midst of his despair and agony, Job glorified God by refusing to falsely accuse God of sin and all that had befallen him. He didn't curse God, nor did he charge God foolishly. And so we have Job's friends from chapter 3 through chapter 31. We have Job and his friends. They argue with each other. They go back and forth. They say, Job, this is your problem. Job says, it's not my problem. I can guarantee you. And he lays out his reason. This is why I think you're wrong. It's not. I don't think Job is necessarily being self-righteous, but he's saying, look, this is all the good that I've done. And he's refuting the idea that there's some heinous sin in his life. Yeah, there's sin in his life. Job would admit that. But some heinous sin to deserve all of this, that's what the idea that Job's combating. So he's kind of have to use going back in his life. Look, this is my reputation. This is my character. Guys, you know this. This is what I do. This is what I've done. Guys, you know this. And in a sense, he is kind of using his own righteousness to defend himself. But we all would do the same thing. You accuse me of this, this, and this. Well, no, that's impossible because I've done this, this, and this, and this. And we look at all the good things we've done to refute all the bad accusations or all the bad charges. This is what we do. We do it. Job did it. But this is what happens between chapters 3 through chapter 31. And we're kind of towards the end of it here in chapter 23. And here he's tired of his friends. He's sick of it. And so he wants to order his case before God. His friends would take everything that Job would say, they'd ignore it, they'd hammer down on the thought that Job again had committed some heinous crime. And Job was getting nowhere with his friends, and his friends were getting nowhere with Job. It's like we're all beating their heads against a brick wall. And so he wants to bring his innocence before God. He says, God, what's going on? Why do I deserve this? Why is this happening? And none of Job's arguments of Job's friends, none of it would stand up to Job's rebuttals, and Job was desperate to find God, so that he could come before his very throne and order his cause before God and argue with God himself. And Job had thought that perhaps that being able to do this would somehow make the situation better, or help him to better understand why all this is going on. And through everything that Job had gone through and experienced, God was silent. God was silent. And it says God never spoke to Job. He didn't tell Job anything about Satan's accusations. He didn't tell Job about the sons of God presenting themselves before God and God giving Satan allowance and freedom to do what he wants in Job's life. God did not tell Job anything that was going on behind the scenes. God was silent. A lot of times in our lives, there are times when it seems like God is silent. God's not hearing us. Where is he? Where is God? And we begin to ourselves, we begin to doubt that God's even with us. And Job is probably beginning to doubt by himself. Says, where is he? I can't find him. I go before and he's not there. I go behind, I can't perceive him. I go where he's known to be working and I can't even see him. I cannot behold him. He hides himself on the right hand that I can't see him. God is completely silent. It's almost like God isn't there. There are times in our lives when it will seem like God isn't there. It will seem like God is just absolutely silent. All we hear is the crickets of the night. And it's usually in our darkest times that we need God to speak the loudest, but yet oftentimes He is the quietest. In the darkest days of your life, it will seem that God is absent from your life. His voice will be silenced by the terrors of the night. There will be times when you'll feel like Job, that no matter where you look or no matter where you go, it's just like God isn't there. It's like God doesn't want anything to do with you. You try to pray and it just seems like your words bounce off the seams. It's like, why? What's the point? Does God even hear me? Does God even know? Does God even understand? There will be times when you just read the scriptures, when you read the Bible, and you're just reading mere words. It's like nothing's happening. I don't know, going in one ear and out the other. It's just you can't comprehend anything. And it's times like these that you need God to speak the most, that He's often the quietest, and where is God? And you try to look for Him, but you can't find Him. In the sunny meadows of life, it's easy to say that God will be with us in the shadowy valleys below. But when we're thrust into those valleys of darkness and all hope is lost from the heart and mind, and God is seemingly absent from our lives, it will tell the true tale of what we really believe. But yet, despite the appearance of God's absence and His silence in Job's life, there's three things that Job confessed about God. I didn't read them for a reason, to add to the suspense. But there are three things that Job confesses before God, even though he cannot see God, he cannot hear God, he cannot find God. There are three things that he understands about God that we need to understand. And this is why Job is able to say, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. Though God kills me, I will still put my trust in Him, because he understands these three basic things. I'll really only touch one this morning. And you'll find this in verse 10. But He knoweth the way that I take. And when He has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. He knoweth the way that I take. God knows the way that I take. So here's Job in the darkest part of his life. He can't find God. He's gone before, he's gone back, he's looked to the left hand where God is always known to be, and he can't see Him. He looks to the right, God's hiding Himself over there. He can't hear God. It's like God's not speaking to him. It's like God's not there. But Job understands that it doesn't matter whether or not Job can perceive God is present. God knows the path, the course of life that Job is on. It's one thing that Job recognizes: God is always present. Even though Job cannot see God, although Job cannot hear God, he knows God is still present. He knows, but He knoweth the way that I take. The word "but" is a contrasting conjunction. So Job paints this negative scene of God. He's not here. I can't see Him. He's not present. I can't hear Him. But as light is so contrasting to darkness, but He knows the way that I take. He knows the course of life that I am on. He knows the path. He knows what I'm going through. God was mindful of Job's life. He knew the path upon which Job walked because God was present in Job's life. And this is one thing he always held on to, is that God was present. This is why He's looking for him. He says, God, I know You are here. This is why he wanted to order his cause before God, because he knew God was here. He says, oh, that I knew where I might find Him. I know God's here. I just don't know where to find Him. I know He knows the way that I take, but I don't know the way that He takes. He knows where to find me, but I don't know where to find Him. God knew exactly the disposition of heart and the whole manner of life concerning Job. It was God who declared Job to be upright and perfect before his adversary. One who eschews evil, one who is just. God knew Job's life. He knew all the righteousness that Job had, all the good things that he had done. God is not some distant force or being unenamored with our lives. God is fully aware of your situation, of your struggles. He knows what you're going through. He knows the paths which we walk. Though we may not be able to see Him, though we may not be able to hear Him, He sees us and He hears us. He knows the way that we take. And even though Job desired to plead his cause before God's throne and declared that God wasn't anywhere to be found, God was not ignorant of Job's current state of affairs, nor was he clueless to the choices that Job had made in life. God was fully well aware of the arguments going on between Job and his friends. I should say, he had 3 of them that were teaming up against him. God knew exactly what was being said. God remembered all of Job's labor of love, and though it may have seemed to Job that God did not know, God was still present in Job's life despite everything that was going on and everything that happened to him. Even though Job could not see the Lord, yet the Lord saw Job. Even though Job could not hear anything from God, God heard everything from Job. Whatever people may have said or however they may have misunderstood Job's character, yet God was acquainted with him, and Job had the fullest confidence that God would do him justice. Job says he knoweth the way that I take. In fact, when Job says that he wants to bring his case before God, God gives Job the opportunity to do so. But before Job does, God says, Job, if we say a word, let me say my piece. And God, a couple chapters, he does. In the end, all of Job's arguments just fall apart. God says, Job, you want to bring your arguments, you want to bring your cause before me? Okay, Job, I am here. But before you say the word, let me say something. And God does. And Job begins to realize how foolish he's been. God knew the way that Job took. God heard everything. The scriptures tell us that God knows the way of the righteous. Many times Jesus encouraged us in the New Testament that God knows all about us. Even the very hairs of our head are numbered. Immediately before this, Jesus posed the question about sparrows and then declared that not one of those sparrows that are sold for a farthing will fall to the ground, will not die without the Father. Jesus says, every bird that dies, God is there with them. Every animal that dies, God is there with them. It says, and he says, aren't you worth more? Aren't you of greater value than some bird? A sparrow, a very common bird, it wasn't very expensive. You can get exotic birds, thousands of dollars, but this is probably birds dirt cheap, dime a dozen. But even though they're so cheap, so plentiful, God says, not one will die without the Father present. This is a joke. If God cares that much about some bird that is of no value in the human eyes, don't you think? And Jesus says, don't you think God is always with you? Aren't you of greater value than these sparrows? And these things, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus spoke these things immediately after his encouragement to not be afraid of those that can kill the body when you're faced with death. Because the darkest time in your life is when you're facing death. There'll be no darker time in life. Is when you're staring death in the face and you know it's coming, you can't stop it. Darkest time. And this is why Jesus says, don't be afraid of those that can kill the body. And after that, they can't do anything else. But be afraid of him who can both destroy the body and soul in hell. Even in the darkest times of death, when we stare death in the face, God is present. God is present. When life hangs on the line, all that can be seen is a horrific end that blinds us to the reality of God's presence. So a lot of people, they don't see God when they look at death. Because it is a dark time. It's the darkest time that a person can face. Job was, as far as Job was concerned, he was facing death. He had no idea how bad this was going to get. But there was something he knew that kept him, that brought him comfort through even the darkest times, even when he could not see God or even find God, was the fact that he knew God was present. He says he knows the way that I take. And the only way for God to know the way that you take is for him to be present. He knows that the way that we all take. He knows what we go through. He knows the darkness that we face. And as far as Job's situation was concerned, his life was on the line. Satan had the authority to give, had the authority given to him to bring Job to the very brink of death. God told Job, Satan, look, you can do whatever you want to Job, just don't kill him. So Satan could bring him up to the point of death. But as long as Job didn't die, he's well within his authority that God gave to him. How bad his boils were, how bad Job's health got, I have no idea. Job could have gone to the brink of death. I don't know. He could have been just thinking about death. He says, this is it. I'm going to die. Everyone forsook Job. He lost everything he owned. He lost his family, his friends, and it would turn against him, falsely accuse him of one thing after another. There's no comfort for Job, not from his friends, not from his wife. It was as if everything, even life itself, was against him. And no matter where he turned or where he looked, all he could see was the evil that had befallen him. He couldn't get past the clouds. He couldn't see through the darkness of the night. And what made the darkness even darker was the fact that Job could not explain why. He couldn't put his finger on it. Why is this happening? You know, when bad things happen, we like to understand, well, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And a lot of times we can't, and that's what makes the darkness even darker. And the unknown more uncertain. We'll not always know the way that God takes, because his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And as high as the heavens are above the earth, even so God's ways are above our ways. But God knows the way that we take. Job's friends judged of that which they did not know, and therefore charged him with that which he was never guilty of. But God, who knew every step Job had taken, would not do so. The fact that God understands intentions, even though others do not, or cannot, or will not, is a great comfort to those who mean honestly. Job also knew that God approved of his way. God knew that Job sometimes had taken a false step, yet Job still had taken the good way, chosen the way of truth. Again, he was an upright man, one who feared God, one who eschewed evil, a perfect man, complete. And Psalm 37 tells us that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Sometimes they are ordered through the dark valley into the silence of the night. God delights in the ways of the good man because the good man inclines himself to the ways of God. God will look upon the steps of a good man with favor and causes him to prosper in all that he does. The steps of Job are ordered by the Lord. Those steps led him straight into this dark period of his life where he lost everything. And where he had no one, not even his wife, to comfort him. God desires to conform us into the image of his Son. And sometimes that requires us to walk through dark valleys of uncertainty, of fear, and of doubt. Sometimes the steps that God directs will lead into the silence of the night. But know that God is present. God knows the steps. He knows the way that you take. He knows the way that you take. God will use the darkness as a cloak and a pavilion from which he watches our every step, taking in our every thought. Though we may not be able to see him, he sees us. Though we may not be able to hear him, he hears us. And though we may not be able to find him, he knows exactly where we're at. And despite all the evil that had come upon him and the lives of his friends, Job knew that God was still present. But he knoweth the way that I take. This is one comfort that helped Job continue on in his faith in the Lord. Had Job began to believe the lies of his friends that God had turned against him, Job would have perished in despair and would have been crushed by his grief. The fact that God knows our ways, he knows the paths that we take, is a great comfort to those who have no comfort. A great encouragement to those who have no encouragement. When you find yourself surrounded by darkness and all you can hear is the silence of the night. When you search for God but you can't seem to find him no matter where you look, just know that God is present. He knows the way that you take. Look not for him with the eyes of flesh, but with the eyes of faith. The eyes of flesh will cause you to see nothing, only despair and hopelessness. The eyes of flesh will only cause you to see the darkness, cause you to hear the silence. But the eyes of faith will pierce the clouds of darkness, cause you to see and understand that God's still here. God is still present. God is still with you. Job expressed his earnest desire to see some visible manifestation of the Lord and to be permitted to argue his cause in his presence, but he sought this in vain. He looked to all the points of the compass where he might rationally expect to find God, but in vain. Job went to the east and to the west and the north and to the south, but he found nothing, because Job was looking with the eyes of flesh. And all he could see was this darkness. God's hiding. I can't behold him. I can't perceive him. I can't understand where he's at. He's not there. And all Job was seeing was his darkness. And all he was hearing was the silence of the night. But there was a little ember of faith still in him. But I know. But he knoweth the way that he takes. Just a little ember of faith that was still glowing in the midst of all the cold darkness that he's facing. Job says, I can't find him, but there's one thing I know, one thing I'm holding on to, that God is still here. I know he is here. He knows the way that I take. He knows what's going on. God is not ignorant. He is not dumb. He very well knows. When trials strike and hard times fall upon us, it is our inclination to search and seek some physical evidence of God's presence in our life, only to be disappointed wherever we look. Because when we look for some physical evidence of God's presence in our lives, all we're going to see is our problems. All we're going to see is our trials. All we're going to see is the darkness, and all we're going to hear is the silence. The wicked even do the same. Do they not declare, where is God? When great tragedies strike and by all outward appearances God is not present. God can't be present, and they'll list all these problems, all these physical evidences that God's not there. But who says God's not there? Darkness does not prove the absence of light, or that light does not exist. Just because the clouds have grown thick and black doesn't mean the sun is no longer shining. But is not this the way of a faithless heart? A heart full of doubt and of uncertainty. But it was in the face of doubt and uncertainty that Job declared that God knew the way that he took. God was watching over him, though Job could not prove it. He cannot point at this or that to his friend and say, God still knows, he knows the way that I take. He couldn't have, because all the physical evidence was pointing to the fact that God wasn't present. All the physical evidence was just darkness, it was blackness, it was silence. You know, God shouldn't have to speak for us to know that he is with us. There's no reason for us to be dismayed because he is our God. We are more value to God than some sparrow. We're more value to him than his own creation. And if God is present at the death of a sparrow, he is present with us all the time. God cares enough for a sparrow. And he's well aware. He knows every path a sparrow takes, even when it falls to the ground, when it dies. God is still present with us. God knows how many hairs we have on our head. They're all numbered. Every star there is in space, God's given a name. We can't even fathom the number of stars, but God not only knows the number of stars, he's given each one a name. He knows exactly where that star is at. And God has taken such concern in his creation, which to him is nothing when it comes compared to us, people. How much more concern will he take in our lives? God will strengthen us. He will help us. He will uphold us by his hand. If you want to hear God speak in the night, you'll have to silence the voices of the night. Night comes with loud voices, loud fears, loud anxieties, loud doubts. But you'll have to shut out the terrors that the night brings along. The doubts, the fears, and the anxieties will all have to be silenced. When you can hear God speak, you'll know that He's been there all along. When God is silent, when all you see around you is darkness and uncertainty and fear and anxiety and hysteria, know that God is present in your life. He knows the way that you take. There's not a direction that you can go. There's not anything that can happen to you that He is unaware of. Have the storms of life shielded your sight of the Lord? Do you doubt God's presence in your life when the dark clouds begin to fill in the sky? When the rains begin to fall, when the floods begin to rise, when the winds begin to blow? You will find yourself surrounded by darkness, and there will be times when all you can hear is the silence of the night. You're wondering, God, where are you? Why don't you speak? Why don't you say something? And we begin to look here and there, and we try to find some physical evidence that God is present, and all we see is darkness. Don't look with the eyes of your flesh. Look with the eyes of your faith. The eyes of faith. Verse 10 is Job's faith, but he knows the way that it takes. Job couldn't prove it. He could have said, guys, look at my life. You know, my life's been destroyed. I have no comforters. You're miserable comforters. You came here to comfort me, but you failed miserably. He says, look, I really have no friends. I have no business. I have no income. I have no servants. I have lost everything. My kids are dead. Killed in a horrific accident. I've been attacked. I've been mocked. All that would point to the fact that God's not present. And that's kind of the premise that his friends were coming at. He says, Job, God's not in your life. God's not in your life. God's not in your life. But Job says, you know what? I don't care what you say. I know God knows the way that I take. God is present. It was Job was now beginning to look through the eyes of faith. He says, look, I know everything seems to tell the opposite, but I know God is present. God is with us. God is with me. He knows the way that I take. He knows what I'm going through. But there will be times when you will search for God, but you won't be able to see Him. You look before you. You look forward into the future, and you can't see anything but darkness. You look behind you, and yeah, you may say, well, God was with you then, but because there's darkness between you and the past event, it begins to cloud us. And we say, well, is God present now? You may go on the left hand to where God is known to work, where God is known to be, and you still can't see Him there. You know God's working, there, but you look and you can't behold Him. He says, I just can't see it. You look to your right, and God, it's like God's playing hide and seek. He's like, wow, God, where are you? There are times in your life where this will happen. You want God to speak so badly, but He is quiet. In times like these, you just need to know that God is present. God knows the way that you take. God has not forsaken you. God has not left you on your own. He knows the storms that you face. Don't let your problems, your trials, your uncertainties, your anxieties, your fears, don't let them block your view of the Savior. Don't let the darkness of the clouds or the raging of the waves cause you to believe that the sun is no longer shining. Put your trust in the Lord. Commit your life into His hands. Job says he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. God, the second thing that Job understood was that God was in control when He has tried him. Job couldn't understand the circumstances, but he knew there was a purpose. He didn't know why everything happened to him, but he knew there was a reason. He knew who threw him into the fire. But know that God is always present with you, no matter what you face, no matter how dark life seems to get, no matter how quiet and all, and no matter how many voices of the night that just are screaming at you. Know that God knows exactly what's going on. He knows the way that you take.